I thought nothing in this life could hurt me more than losing my husband. I was wrong. The day my son died, no one called me. No one came to my door. I only found out because I phoned my daughter-in-law, desperate to hear his voice one more time. He was buried yesterday, she said, like she was talking about the weather. My hands turned ice cold. My legs felt like they weren't mine. My boy, my only son, was in the ground, and I wasn't even allowed to say goodbye. My name is Rosa Moretti, and I am 73 years old. I have lived a long life, long enough to see good days and bad, feast and famine, joy and heartbreak. But nothing prepared me for the kind of pain I felt that day. I was sitting in my small kitchen that morning, sunlight spilling through the lace curtains, the smell of strong coffee filling the air. I just finished folding the laundry, a habit of mine, keeping busy to keep the loneliness at bay. Ever since my husband passed, my home had been too quiet. The laughter that once filled these walls now existed only in memory. The only thing that kept me going was knowing my son, Marco, still needed me. Over the years I had given him everything I could. When he married, I gave him the little house my husband built with his own hands. When his first child was born, I handed over my savings so they could buy a bigger car. I never thought twice. That's what mothers do. We give, even when there's nothing left to give. But lately, Marco had been distant. Fewer calls. Shorter visits. His wife, Angela, always seemed to have somewhere to be, something more important than letting me see my grandchildren. I told myself it was life. People get busy. Families change. Still, my heart ached every time my calls went unanswered. That morning, I hadn't heard from him in a week. Something inside me felt wrong. I dialed his number. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. Finally, I called Angela. She picked up after 3 rings. Angela, I said, trying to sound calm, I've been worried. Is Marco all right? There was a pause, the faint sound of a television in the background. And then her voice, flat, unfeeling. He was buried yesterday. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. Buried? What are you talking about? My voice shook. Marco passed away last week. The funeral was yesterday. We didn't think it was appropriate for you to be there. I felt my chest tighten, as if someone had reached in and squeezed the air from my lungs. Not appropriate? I whispered. I'm his mother. I'm sorry, Rosa. I have to go, she said quickly, and the line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, my reflection swimming in the black screen. I don't remember standing up, but suddenly I was on my feet, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. My knees trembled so badly I had to grab the counter to keep from falling. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, mocking me with its steady rhythm while my world had stopped. I couldn't cry. I couldn't breathe. My son was gone, and I hadn't even seen his face one last time. I sank into the old wooden chair by the table, my hands pressed to my face. And that's when the tears came. Hot, angry, endless. I thought about the day he was born, how small he'd been in my arms. I thought about the nights I stayed up sewing his school uniforms when money was tight. I thought about the pride I felt watching him become a father himself. And now, nothing. Not even a goodbye. The hours that followed are a blur. I remember sitting there until the coffee in my cup went cold, until the sunlight shifted and shadows crept into the corners of the kitchen. My phone buzzed a few times, neighbors checking in, a telemarketer, but not one call from my son's family. By evening, something inside me shifted. The grief was still there, heavy as stone, but beneath it, there was something else. A flicker of anger. A question that wouldn't leave me alone. Why didn't they tell me? It didn't make sense. Even if Angela disliked me, and she made that no secret, Marco would never have done this to me. He wasn't perfect, but he loved me. Or so I believed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the shadows of the lace curtains swaying in the moonlight. Every creak of the house seemed to echo the same word. Why? The next morning, I decided I needed answers. I dressed in my best black coat, the one I had worn to my husband's funeral, and took the bus into town. The church where Marco's funeral had supposedly been held was quiet, its heavy wooden doors locked. I peered through the glass rows of empty pews, the scent of incense still faint in the air. I walked to the small flower shop down the street. The owner, Maria, had known me for years. She looked startled when she saw me. "Rosa," she said softly, "I'm so sorry about Marco." My throat tightened. "You knew?" She nodded. I assumed you were there. I delivered the flowers myself." I swallowed hard. "Who ordered them?" "Angela," she said. "She told me not to mention it to you. Said you were unwell and couldn't handle the service." Unwell. My hands curled into fists. That was a lie. A calculated, cruel lie. On the way home, the cold wind cut through my coat, but I barely felt it. My mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. The distance. The unanswered calls. The way Angela had always tried to keep the children from me. This wasn't just about the funeral. This was about erasing me from Marco's life. And now from his death. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table again, but this time I wasn't staring into the void. I was thinking. Planning. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to fade quietly into the background. If Angela wanted me gone, she was going to learn just how stubborn an old woman could be. And so, with trembling hands but a steady heart, I reached for my address book. There was one person I knew I could call. Someone who had been a friend to my family for decades. Someone who might just help me find the truth about what really happened to my son. I flipped open my old leather address book, the pages yellowed and soft from decades of use. My finger stopped at a name I hadn't called in years. Giovanni Russo. He wasn't just my late husband's friend. He'd been a police officer in our town for 30 years before retiring. If anyone could help me find out what happened, it was him. I dialed the number slowly, half afraid it would no longer work. After 3 rings, a familiar voice, deeper now but still warm, answered. "Rosa? Is that really you?" The sound of my name spoken with kindness almost undid me. "It's me, Giovanni. I need your help." Within an hour, he was sitting at my kitchen table, his large hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. I told him everything. Angela's cold words, the secret funeral, the lies about me being unwell. My voice cracked more than once, but I forced myself to get through it without falling apart. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, his brows drawn together. "Rosa, that's not just cruel, it's suspicious," he said. "Funerals aren't arranged in secrecy unless there's something someone doesn't want others to know." I nodded. "That's what I thought. I want to know how my son died. I want the truth." Giovanni hesitated, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook. "Leave this with me. I'll make some calls, talk to a few people at the station. I still have friends there." Before he left, he placed a hand on mine. "Rosa, prepare yourself. The truth might hurt more than the lies." That night, I sat in my armchair by the window, knitting needles idle in my lap. The street outside was quiet, the faint glow of the street lamp spilling onto the pavement. I thought of Marco, how as a boy, he used to run down this very street, his little legs pumping hard, his laughter filling the air. I wondered if he'd been happy in the days before he died, or if he'd been carrying some secret pain I never saw. The phone rang 2 days later. Giovanni's voice was grave. "Rosa, we need to talk. In person." When he arrived, he looked older somehow, wearier. He sat down heavily. "Your son. He died of a heart attack. At home." My chest tightened. "Then why keep that from me?" Giovanni sighed. "Because, Rosa, there's more. He left behind debt. A lot of it. Gambling debt." I shook my head in disbelief. "No. Marco wasn't." But even as I said it, memories came back. The times he'd asked to borrow money, the strange nervousness in his voice, the expensive things that appeared in his house despite his modest job. "Angela is the beneficiary of his life insurance," Giovanni continued. "If creditors found out she held a service that brought attention to his estate, they might come after the assets before she could move them. My guess is, She buried him quietly to avoid notice, and to keep control of whatever's left. I felt sick. My son, gone. My daughter-in-law, more concerned with money than with his own mother's grief. In the days that followed, my sorrow began to harden into something sharper. I realized that for years, Angela had been quietly moving me out of Marco's life. It wasn't just distance. It was erasure. And now she had used his death to erase me completely. But I also knew something else. If Marco had debts, and Angela was hiding assets, there might be legal ways to challenge her. I wasn't looking for money. I didn't want a cent from her. But I wanted justice. And I wanted my place as Marco's mother recognized. I went to see an attorney named Clara Rossi, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a reputation for handling difficult family disputes. Sitting across from her, I told her everything from the day Angela married my son to the cold phone call that shattered my heart. When I finished, Clara tapped her pen thoughtfully. Legally, Angela didn't have to invite you to the funeral, she said. But if she misrepresented your health or took steps to prevent you from knowing about your son's death, that could be argued as emotional harm. More importantly, if there are hidden assets, we can investigate. For the first time since Marco's death, I felt a spark of hope. Not because I wanted revenge for revenge's sake, but because taking action made me feel less helpless. Over the next few weeks, Clara and her team began quietly gathering information. Bank statements, property records, insurance payouts. I went about my days as normally as I could, shopping at the market, tending to my little balcony garden, but inside, I was waiting. Waiting for something to break. It came one rainy Thursday. Clara called me into her office and slid a folder across the desk. Inside were copies of transactions, large sums transferred from Marco's account to one under Angela's name just days before his death. Another document showed a property deed, a small vacation home Marco had bought years ago, that had recently been sold for cash. She's liquidating everything, Clara said. And she's doing it fast. I stared at the papers, my jaw tightening. She's taking everything he built, everything I helped him with, and using it for herself. Clara's expression softened. Rosa, you helped build that too. Legally, some of those assets can be traced back to you, especially the house you gifted them. If you want to fight this, we can. I looked out the rain-streaked window. For so long, I had been the quiet one, the giver, the one who stepped aside. But not this time. This time, I was going to stand my ground. Do it, I said. File whatever you need to. I'm not letting her erase me. The next steps would be difficult, I knew that. Angela wouldn't take kindly to being challenged, and the truth about Marco's debts might tarnish his memory. But I also knew something else. My silence had allowed her to control the story. And I was done being silent. Clara didn't waste time. Within a week, legal notices were sent to freeze certain accounts and stop the sale of any more property until ownership could be reviewed. It wasn't the final battle, but it was the first shot across the bow. I expected Angela to respond through her own lawyer. What I didn't expect was for her to show up at my door. It was a windy afternoon, the kind where leaves scraped across the pavement like whispers. I was in the kitchen kneading bread dough, the way my mother taught me, when the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door. There she stood, Angela, dressed in a sleek black coat, her hair perfect as always, her expression somewhere between irritation and contempt. "May I come in?" she asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't really asking. I stepped aside, wordless. She walked into my living room and turned to face me. "I got your little surprise," she said, her lips curling slightly. "Freezing my accounts? Really, Rosa?" I folded my arms. "It's not your accounts I'm after, Angela. It's the truth." Her eyebrows rose. "The truth? What truth do you think you're going to find?" I took a breath, my voice steady. "The truth about why you kept me from my son's funeral. Why you told people I was unwell when I wasn't. Why you've been selling off everything Marco had without so much as a phone call to me." She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You think you have a right to know? You weren't part of his life anymore, Rosa. You barely saw the kids. Marco, he moved on. Her words were meant to wound, and they did, but they also lit a fire in me. He moved on because you pushed me out. You built walls between us. And now you're trying to erase me completely. Angela rolled her eyes. I don't owe you explanations. Marco's life and death are my business. I stepped closer, my hands trembling but my gaze locked on hers. He was my son before he was your husband. I carried him, I raised him, I sacrificed for him. You don't get to decide I don't matter. For a moment, something flickered in her expression. Unease, maybe even guilt, but it was gone in a heartbeat. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, tossing it onto my coffee table. This is from my lawyer, she said. If you want to fight, fine. But I promise you, Rosa, you'll regret it. With that, she turned and walked out, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. I stood there for a long time after she left, staring at that folded paper. When I finally opened it, I found a letter threatening a countersuit, claiming I was harassing her, defaming her, trying to seize assets that did not belong to me. My stomach churned. She was playing hardball. That night, I called Giovanni. He came over with a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses. We sat at the kitchen table, the bread I'd baked earlier cooling between us. She's going to fight dirty, I said, handing him the letter. Giovanni skimmed it, snorted, and set it aside. Of course she is. But she's underestimating you. She thinks you're just an old woman with no fight left. That's her mistake. I smiled faintly, though my chest still felt heavy. I don't want to drag Marco's name through the mud. Giovanni's gaze softened. Rosa, you're not dishonoring him. You're protecting the part of him that was good. The part that wouldn't have wanted you erased. In the days that followed, Clara gathered more evidence. One of the most damning pieces came from an unexpected source. Marco's old friend, Stefano. He called me out of the blue, saying he'd heard what Angela had done. Rosa, he said, I don't know if you know this, but Marco told me he'd been trying to pay back some of the money you gave him for the house. He felt guilty. He said Angela didn't want you to know about the debts because she didn't want you involved in their finances. I gripped the phone tighter. So he didn't cut me out? No, Stefano said firmly. He was trying to fix things. But he was tired. The stress was eating at him. He told me once that if anything happened to him, he wanted you to take care of the kids. Did she tell you that? My throat tightened. No, I whispered. She didn't. Hearing that lit something inside me. Not just anger now, but a deep sense of purpose. Angela had taken my goodbye from me, but she wasn't going to take my place in my grandchildren's lives. Clara and I began building a case not only for the assets but for visitation rights. We requested court-ordered mediation. Angela tried to delay, but the law was on our side enough to force a meeting. The day of the mediation, I dressed with care. A simple navy dress, my hair pinned neatly, the silver cross my mother had given me resting against my collarbone. I walked into that room not as a broken, grieving mother, but as a woman who had loved fiercely and would fight just as fiercely. Angela sat across from me, her lawyer whispering in her ear. She wouldn't look at me. The mediator, a kind-eyed woman, began by asking us both to speak. When it was my turn, I didn't talk about the money. I talked about Marco. I talked about the little boy who scraped his knees learning to ride a bike, the teenager who worked part-time at the bakery to help with bills, the father who lit up when his children laughed. I talked about love and about loss. And then I talked about dignity. About not being erased from the life of the child I had brought into this world. About the cruelty of finding out about my son's funeral after the fact. I didn't raise my voice, but every word was steady, every word true. When I finished, there was a silence in the room. Angela's lawyer cleared his throat. We maintain that Mrs. Moretti has no legal claim, but the mediator held up a hand. Legal claims aside, it's clear that the emotional harm here is significant. I encourage you both to find a resolution. Angela shifted in her seat. She didn't agree to anything that day, but I saw it. The first crack in her armor. That night, as I sat alone in my living room, I realized something important. This fight wasn't just about Angela. It wasn't just about the assets or even the funeral. It was about me, about reclaiming the part of myself I'd allowed to be diminished over the years. For the first time since Marco died, I felt strong. The morning after the mediation, I woke with a strange calmness. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was steadiness, the kind you feel before taking a step onto unfamiliar but necessary ground. I made myself a strong cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and went through the file Clara had given me. Inside was everything we'd gathered: bank transfers, property sales, witness statements. But there was something new: a printout of an email. Clara had found it through a subpoena request. It was from Angela to her real estate agent, written 2 days after Marco's death. List the vacation home immediately. Keep it quiet. Don't notify Rosa. She has no legal standing, and I don't want her interfering. Reading those words, I felt a sting. Not just from the cruelty but from the certainty with which she wrote them. To her I was nothing. Disposable. I slid the paper back into the folder and picked up the phone. "Clara," I said when she answered, "I want to use that email. Not just in court. I want her to see it. I want her to know I know." Clara hesitated. "It's your call, Rosa. But once she knows what we have, she might dig in harder." "Let her," I said, my voice steady. "She needs to understand I'm not afraid anymore." That afternoon, I went to Giovanni's house. He lived in a modest 2-story with a garden out front, his porch smelling faintly of basil and fresh earth. Over coffee, I told him about the email. Giovanni leaned back, crossing his arms. "She's cornered, Rosa. People like Angela, when they know the walls are closing in, they make mistakes. You just have to be ready to catch them." I nodded. I've spent years letting her control the story. No more. He gave me a small smile. "There's the Rosa I remember." 2 days later, I called Angela and asked to meet. To my surprise, she agreed. We met in a small cafe downtown, the kind with checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh bread in the air. She arrived late, sliding into the booth across from me without so much as a hello. "What is it?" she asked, her tone clipped. I reached into my bag and slid the printed email across the table. "This." Her eyes flickered over the words, and for the first time, I saw her lose control, just for a second. "Where did you get this?" she demanded. "I don't think that matters," I said quietly. "What matters is you knew exactly what you were doing. You didn't just exclude me. You erased me, on purpose. And you lied to everyone to make it happen." Angela's lips pressed into a thin line. "You think you can guilt me into giving you something? You don't know how this works, Rosa." I leaned forward. "I know exactly how it works now. You used my son's death to secure every advantage for yourself. But here's what you don't understand. I have nothing left to lose. That makes me dangerous to you." For a moment, she looked like she might respond, but instead she grabbed her purse and stood. "I'll see you in court," she said, her voice low before walking out. When I told Clara about the meeting, she frowned. That may have rattled her enough to make a move. "We'll keep an eye out." Sure enough, less than a week later, Clara called me with news. Angela had tried to transfer a large sum out of one of the frozen accounts by routing it through a shell company. Because of the legal freeze, the transfer was flagged and stopped, but the attempt itself was now evidence of her bad faith. Clara was almost smiling when she told me. "This strengthens your position, Rosa. A judge will not look kindly on that kind of behavior." In the middle of all this, there was something else. Something more personal, that weighed on me. I hadn't seen my grandchildren since Marco's death. Every night, I thought about them. Did they know what was happening? Did they miss me? Or had Angela poisoned their minds the same way she tried to erase me? One evening, while walking home from the market, I passed the park near Angela's neighborhood. And there they were, my 2 little loves on the swings, laughing as another woman, probably a nanny, pushed them. I froze for a moment, my heart pounding. Then I walked toward them slowly. "Ciao, mi amore," I said softly. They turned, eyes wide. "Na," my granddaughter squealed, leaping off the swing and into my arms. My grandson followed, clinging to my coat. I held them close, breathing in the warm, familiar scent of their hair. "I've missed you so much," I whispered. The nanny looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Moretti, I should call their mother." "It's all right," I said gently, still holding them. "I won't keep them. I just wanted to say hello." I kissed their cheeks, memorizing the feel of them, before stepping back. "I love you both. Always remember that." As I walked away, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for them. By the time our next court date approached, the case had shifted. What began as an attempt to secure my rights had become a fight for the truth. Not just for me, but for Marco's memory and his children's future. Angela's lawyer filed motion after motion to delay, but Clara countered every one. And then, just days before we were set to appear before the judge, Clara got a call from Angela's attorney. "They want to talk settlement," she told me, her eyes gleaming. Clara's voice was calm, but I could hear the current of energy beneath it. "They want to talk settlement," she said again, sliding a folder toward me across her desk. I stared at it for a moment before opening it. Inside was a formal offer from Angela's lawyer. The terms were interesting. She would agree to release a portion of the assets back to me. Specifically, the value of the house I had gifted Marco, plus an additional lump sum. In exchange, I would drop all further claims, agree not to challenge the sale of the vacation home, and, this one made my stomach twist, agree to no further contact with my grandchildren unless Angela personally approved it. I closed the folder slowly, my jaw tightening. So she's putting a price on my silence, and my family. Clara nodded. "It's a strategic move. She's offering enough money to tempt you, but she's making the personal cost high. She wants to keep control." I leaned back, feeling the weight of it all. For a moment, I imagined taking the money. It would be easier. No more court dates, no more stress. I could repair the roof on my house, pay off my medical bills, maybe even take a trip back to Italy like I'd always dreamed. But then I pictured my grandchildren's faces in the park that day, the way they ran to me, the way they clung to my coat. I remembered Marco's friend Stefano telling me that my son wanted me to take care of them if anything happened to him. And I knew. "No," I said, my voice firm. "I won't sell my place in my family for cash. If I walk away now, she wins. And if I take this money, she'll use it to say I cared more about what I could get than about my son or the children. I'm not giving her that weapon." Clara smiled faintly. "I was hoping you'd say that. We'll push forward." The weeks leading up to the court date were exhausting. Angela's side tried every tactic, accusing me of being mentally unfit to handle legal matters, claiming I had been estranged from Marco by choice, even hinting that my involvement would confuse and upset the children. But Clara was ready for them. She had affidavits from neighbors, from Stefano, from Maria the florist, all of them confirming my active role in Marco's life and Angela's pattern of cutting me out. Giovanni even testified, providing a statement about Angela's behavior after Marco's death and the suspicious handling of the assets. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room, the house silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. My husband's photograph sat on the mantel, his eyes kind, his smile faint. I picked it up and whispered, "I'm doing this for him, for us. For the son we raised." I didn't know if I would win in every legal sense. But I knew that by showing up, by speaking the truth out loud, I had already taken back something Angela could never steal, my voice. The courtroom the next morning was cool and quiet, sunlight slanting in through high windows. Angela sat at the other table, her hair immaculate, her expression unreadable. I avoided looking at her. My focus was on the judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes who wasted no time getting to the point. Clara presented our case clearly, methodically, outlining the gifts I had given, the email proving Angela's intent to exclude me, the attempt to transfer funds despite the freeze. Angela's lawyer tried to counter, painting me as overly emotional and financially motivated, but each point was dismantled by the evidence we'd brought. Then the judge turned to me. "Mrs. Moretti, you may speak if you wish." I rose slowly, my hands steady despite the pounding of my heart. "Your Honor, I am not here for money. I am here because I was denied the chance to say goodbye to my only child. I was lied about, cut off, and treated as though I did not exist. I am here because my son would not have wanted this, and because his children deserve to know their grandmother." I saw the judge's expression soften, just slightly, as I spoke. I have lived my life quietly, giving what I could, asking for little. But I will not allow myself to be erased. Not in my son's life, and not in his death. When I sat down, there was a silence that felt heavier than any sound. The judge didn't issue an immediate ruling that day, but she did something that made my heart leap. She ordered temporary visitation rights with my grandchildren until the matter was resolved, and extended the freeze on Angela's access to certain funds. Angela's jaw tightened as the judge spoke, but she said nothing. As we walked out of the courtroom, Clara touched my arm. "This is a good sign, Rosa. Very good." For the first time in months, I felt something like real hope. The weeks after the hearing felt different. For the first time since Marco's death, I woke up without that crushing sense of powerlessness. It wasn't gone completely. Grief doesn't disappear, but the weight had shifted. Now it felt like I was moving toward something instead of being trapped under it. The court-ordered visits with my grandchildren began the very next Saturday. When they arrived at my door, holding small backpacks and shy smiles, I almost cried. I didn't. I wanted them to see me strong, not broken. We spent the day baking cookies, playing cards, and walking to the little ice cream shop around the corner. At one point, my granddaughter slipped her small hand into mine and whispered, "I'm glad we can see you now, Nana." It was the smallest sentence, but it told me everything. Angela had been keeping them away on purpose, and the children had noticed. While I cherished every moment with them, Clara and I kept pushing forward. She'd been digging into Marco's finances, and one day she called me with a tone in her voice I hadn't heard before. Triumph. "Rosa, you're going to want to sit down for this," she said. When I got to her office, she laid out a stack of documents. "These are bank records from 6 months before Marco died. Look here, large cash withdrawals, always on Fridays. And here, transfers to an account in Angela's name that she opened without telling him." I frowned. Why would she do that? Clara leaned forward. "Because she was the one feeding the gambling debt, Rosa. Marco wasn't just a victim of bad luck. He was trapped in a cycle she encouraged. I've spoken to 2 people who say Angela introduced him to those games. And she kept him hooked. When he won, she made sure the money stayed with her. When he lost, she made him feel like he owed her. It's textbook manipulation." I felt my chest tighten, not from shock, but from the confirmation of something I had feared deep down. So she bled him dry, and then she took everything when he was gone. Clara nodded. "And now we can prove it." The next court date was unlike the others. This time, we had leverage, real undeniable proof that Angela's hands were not clean. Clara presented the evidence methodically, laying out the pattern of financial control, the hidden accounts, the email about keeping me from the funeral, and the attempted asset transfer after Marco's death. Angela's lawyer tried to object, but the judge allowed it all in. The atmosphere in the room shifted. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in Angela's eyes. Then Clara called Stefano as a witness. He spoke clearly, directly, about Marco's regret in the months before his death, about his wish for me to be in the children's lives, and about his growing concern over Angela's management of the family finances. By the time he stepped down, Angela looked pale. Her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she kept her gaze fixed on the table in front of her. That evening, Giovanni came by my house with a small bouquet of fresh basil from his garden. "You should be proud," he said. "You didn't just show up, you fought. And you're winning." I smiled, though my mind was still spinning. "It's not over yet." "No," he agreed. "But she's not in control anymore. And that's what scares her." The next morning, Clara called with news I didn't expect. Angela's lawyer had reached out again. This time, they weren't offering a settlement on her terms. They were asking to discuss an agreement that would include full visitation rights for me, a public acknowledgement of my role in Marco's life, and a financial division far more in my favor. "She's rattled, Rosa," Clara said. "She knows if we push this to a full trial, the damage to her reputation, and her access to those assets, could be severe. I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to drag this into court, to have the judge lay out every one of Angela's lies in the official record. But another part of me was tired. Tired of the fight. Tired of living in the shadow of this grief. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the lights low, the smell of bread cooling on the counter. I thought of Marco, of the boy he had been before Angela, of the man he tried to be despite her. I thought of my grandchildren, and how they'd smiled when I handed them their warm cookies. And I thought of myself, not as a victim, but as a woman who had been through the fire and was finally standing on the other side. I met Clara at her office the next morning, the weight of my decision heavy in my chest. She slid the latest settlement proposal across the desk. "This is the best we've seen yet," she said. "Full visitation, half of the remaining assets, and a written statement from Angela acknowledging your relationship with Marco and the children." I looked down at the papers. The word seemed almost unreal after everything we'd been through. "If I sign this," I asked quietly, "will it be over?" Clara nodded. "Legally, yes. It would mean no more court dates. No more filings. You'd have what matters most, time with your grandchildren, and you'd have secured the part of Marco's estate that's rightfully tied to you." I leaned back, my hands folded in my lap. I thought about the months of bitterness and strain, the sleepless nights, the weight of every courtroom appearance. I thought about the anger I'd carried since that cold morning when Angela told me my son had been buried without me. And then, I thought about what winning really meant. Winning wasn't just about proving Angela wrong. It was about reclaiming my life from the shadow she'd tried to cast over it. It was about choosing peace for myself, even if part of me still wanted to see her answer for every cruel choice. "I'll sign," I said finally. "But I want one thing more." Clara raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" I want to tell her to her face exactly why she didn't win, why she never will. 2 days later, the meeting was arranged in Clara's conference room. Angela walked in with her lawyer, her expression carefully composed, but I could see the stiffness in her movements, the way her fingers clenched around her pen. The papers were on the table. We each signed where required, the sound of the pen scratching against the paper loud in the quiet room. When the last page was done, I closed the folder and looked directly at her. "Angela," I said, my voice calm but firm, "you took my goodbye from me. You lied to my face and to others about my health. You kept me from my grandchildren, and you tried to erase me from my son's life story." She didn't answer, her eyes narrowing slightly. "But here's the truth," I continued. "You didn't win. You couldn't. Because you can take money, you can hide property, you can even take a funeral away. But you can't take the love I had for my son, and you can't take my place in my grandchildren's hearts. That's mine, and it always will be." For the first time, I saw her look away. She gathered her things quickly, muttering something to her lawyer, and left the room without another word.